Hello Greenstylers, Cynthia here, and today I will be sewing up the sundown skirt with you. The sundown skirt is designed to be made out of a sweatshirt fabric such as French terry or another stable bottom weight knit with at least 25% stretch, and because of that it's very subtly sexy, hugging your curves and accentuating them in just the right places. You can choose between a high or a low hem and also a high or a low side slit. Let's take a look at the pieces you'll need to cut to make your very own sundown skirt. The first piece we'll need to cut is labeled K1. It's the front of the skirt. Go ahead and mark the center top and the center bottom of the skirt while you're cutting out the pattern pieces. Those will come in handy later on when you attach the waistband or the facing. What you see here is a high side and a high hem option. You can also mix those up. You could choose a low side and a high hem, or you could choose the low hem and the low side, or you could choose the low hem and the high side. The next piece to cut is the back of the skirt, labeled K2. Again, go ahead and mark the center top and bottom of the skirt. I've used 2 pins to distinguish the front from the back. You can figure that out later because the back is wider, but it will be easier if you mark it now. Again, I've chosen the high side and the high hem. Make sure you choose the same side and hem options for the back as you did for the front. The front waistband is labeled K4 and the back waistband is labeled K3. You have a 2-inch elastic or a 3-inch elastic option. Mark the hole placement for your grommets or buttonholes, and again mark the center front and center back with pins, notches, markers, however you choose. You will notice that the back waistband is wider than the front waistband. You can choose to leave your hem raw, but you can also use a facing on the raw edge if your fabric likes to curl like mine does. You can also use a facing if you'd like to have a finished edge. There are 3 options for the facings, so make sure you cut the facing that matches your skirt. Again, I've marked the center bottom of the facings with 1 and 2 pins to distinguish front and back. To begin construction, lay your back piece on the table with right side up. Bring over your front piece and lay it with right sides down. You're going to line up those side seams and pin them in place. Stitch those seams with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And in addition to my skirt getting stuck on my mat, you may notice that those seams are more forward than you're used to. These seams will sit a little more forward on your body, and that is accurate, and it's part of the design, which is really cool. Before constructing the waistband, we'll want to prepare that front waistband by attaching some interfacing to the wrong side of the waistband right at those markings. So cut out some little squares of interfacing and iron those on, and then you can add your grommets or buttonholes. If you're adding grommets, just follow the instructions on your grommet kit. I thought I'd show you how I add buttonholes, but if you are adding buttonholes, I recommend reading your manual and practicing on some scraps before you get started. As you can see, I've made a couple of additional markings underneath the buttonhole marking. That way I have a starting point so that both of my buttonholes come out evenly and that the marking from the pattern piece ends up at the center of my buttonhole. Once you have your buttonhole foot in place, make sure that you have selected a buttonhole stitch, line up your fabric underneath the buttonhole foot, and make sure everything's nice and straight. You'll want to help your machine by just holding onto the fabric, but you don't want to be pulling on it or forcing it to go any which direction. But I just like to keep my fingers on it and help it move along a little bit, just guiding it as the feed dogs do all the work. Then once my buttonhole is stitched, I'll clip off the threads and leave them long. And what we're looking at right here is the front of the fabric, and I have the buttonhole marking in the center and some long threads. There are a few ways that you can finish these off. You can just clip those off and use some fray check if you like, but I like to take a hand needle and first pull them through to the back. Two of the threads are always close together, and then two of the threads are just sort of off on their own. So once those threads are pulled through, you can go ahead and knot the two in the back that are close together. Make sure those aren't going to fall out. Then clip off all the ends so you don't have any very long threads, and you can use some fray check and just dab it on there in order to keep those threads in place and make sure that nothing tries to fall out. Then to open up the buttonhole, I'll use my seam ripper. Push the tip down and then back up through the fabric before pulling to rip. And that way you open up just a very precise little section within the buttonhole. And then you can use your tiny scissors to cut it as far open as you'd like it to be. We'll only be pulling a drawstring through the opening, so we don't need a very large opening. And finally, if you use some water-soluble marker like I did, just dab a little bit of water on there, and now we have a finished buttonhole. Isn't that nice? Once we have our buttonholes or grommets completed, we will attach the front and back of the waistbands together. So lay them with right sides together and pin the short ends. Stitch these together using a stretch stitch or your serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. But first, make sure to switch back to your regular foot if you haven't already. I will be using stitch number 6 on my machine, which is also called the lightning bolt stitch. Another good option on your sewing machine would be the triple straight stitch. Now fold the waistband in half with wrong sides touching. If you use the sewing machine, you can push that seam open to make it more flat on the inside. Line up all of the raw edges along that long edge. And if you used pins or clips to mark the center, front, and back, make sure to keep those in place because you will need that coming up really soon. Now, as I was doing this, I was noticing all of the fabric along that long edge was curling. The two edges were curling away from each other, which could make it difficult when it comes time to attach the waistband to the skirt. So I am going to go ahead and baste those edges together. You can baste all around the whole thing like I've done. Just be careful when you go over those pins that mark the center, front, and back. Or you can just make sure to leave a 2-inch opening at the center back because you'll need to get in there later with your elastic. But for now, we will take it over to our skirt. And again, you can see I have the center, front, and back of the skirt still marked. And I'm going to make sure to line up the front waistband with the front skirt and the back waistband with the back skirt. Flip the waistband so that it's right sides facing with the skirt. So now my waistband is inside out and it is touching the right sides of the waistband with the right sides of the skirt. Pin it in place, matching up the center, front, and center back, and also matching up those side seams. You can put pins on the left and the right side of those side seams to help when you stitch them together to line up those side seams. Find the back of the waistband and mark a 2-inch opening in the back. I like to use a different type of clip so that it'll catch my attention when I'm stitching, and I'll make sure to stop. You want to leave that much open so that you can insert the elastic later on. Stitch up the waistband to the skirt using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'll actually be stitching mine with a basting stitch, which you can do as well. My fabric was curling so badly that I was just a little bit concerned about it moving around as I was stitching. You can see I'm using my fingers to hold it down and make sure everything stayed in place. If you use the basting stitch, you can finish up stitching it. Just check everything to make sure that everything attached smoothly, that there are no bubbles or puckers, and you can also check your side seams and make sure that you were able to line up your side seams correctly. And once you've checked everything and made sure that you're happy, you can stitch it up using your stretch stitch or serger. Just make sure that you maintain that 2-inch opening in the back. Couple notes about the elastic. First of all, I've chosen the 3-inch elastic option. Your waist measurement minus 2 inches is a good starting point for elastic, but you do want to try it on, stretch it around your body to make sure it's comfortable before you get started. Another fit adjustment that I have made is because I tend to get gaping in the back of my waistband. So pretend that my hand here is my back end, and that's my rear end, and here's the back of my waist. So when I put on my skirt and I'm using a tall elastic, the back kind of hangs open like that. And that is called back gaping. And it just depends on the shape of your body. Everybody's body is shaped differently, and mine just happens to have a hard curve right there. So with the tall elastics, it will enhance that look. So what I have done, and what you might do if you find that your back gapes with a tall elastic, is cut out a little wedge from the back of the elastic. I have cut out about 3/8 of an inch from the top edge of both ends of the elastic, and then angled it down so that the bottom is the full length, and it ends up looking like a wedge like this. That will help reduce that gaping, because when you close up the elastic, the top of the elastic will now be slightly smaller than the bottom, and you've now created sort of a contoured waistband effect, which will close up that gaping in the back. This won't necessarily be the case for everyone, so I recommend trying it on without adjusting it first and then seeing how it works for you. If you basted your waistband together along the edges like I did, you'll just want to open up that basting stitch right along that 2-inch opening so you have a place to insert your elastic. You may notice the little chalk markings here. Those will help tremendously to visually point out the top of the waistband to you, so I recommend putting those, and it also can help you see where the top and the front of the waistband is. When you push it through the waistband, that elastic is going to want to twist and turn and flip every which way, so you can match those up when it comes to attaching them at the end, and it'll just help you know that it's not flipped anywhere inside. Phew! After wrestling that elastic for a few minutes, wipe off the sweat from your brow, pin them together so that you can then pull the waistband all out and stretch it to make sure that everything is nice and smooth and that nothing's flipped inside. Now Now that that's confirmed, pull the ends of the elastic back out and we'll stitch them in place. I like to use a very wide zigzag stitch to just stitch zigzag straight down from top to bottom of the elastic, but you can also use a straight stitch and stitch an X shape to hold that elastic in place. Now we can just smooth everything out, stretch it a few times to evenly distribute the fabric around that elastic, and then flip it so that the seam is back out again and close up that opening. After that, you'll just insert your drawstring and you're done with your waistband. Now let's talk about finishing this hem. So one of the options is just to leave the hem raw. That's actually how this pattern was intended to be finished, was with the raw edge. And if you're going to do the raw edge, all you'll need to do is stitch a straight stitch all around the entire length of the hem, and then you're done. If your fabric wants to curl like this, which mine is not doing, it curled on the straight cuts, but on these curved cuts it's staying pretty flat. But if it is curling, then you can adhere a piece of iron-on interfacing, just like a ½ inch or so, all along the edge, and then stitch along the edge to just attach that interfacing, and then you're done. The option that I'll be using will utilize the hem facing, but also result in a raw edge hem. You want to choose this option if you'd like the raw edge look, but your fabric is curling really badly at the edges and you want more than iron-on interfacing in order to stop that curling. What happens is when you put the two pieces of fabric together and they're curling in opposite directions, when you stick them together, they'll have what we call an opposing curling tendency. So they'll sort of pull each other towards the center and remove that curl. This is also a nice option if you want that raw edge at the bottom, but just would like some added weight at the bottom of the skirt to help it hang more nicely. We'll lay out the two hem facing pieces with right sides together. So the one on the table is right side up and the one laying on top of it is right side down. Line up those two short side seams and we'll pin those in place. Make sure that you're very careful about laying out the hem facings so that they're smooth and not twisted. It's really easy to twist those up. We'll stitch those two short seams using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And that is done. They're ready to be attached to the skirt hem. Before pinning, just make sure you're aligning the front skirt with the front facing and the back skirt with the back facing. You will place them with wrong sides together, so the right side of the skirt is on the outside and the right side of the facing will be facing in towards your body. First, pin the front and back centers and the side seams. And you'll be stitching both the bottom and the top edge of the facing, so go ahead and add pins to both edges of the facing. And once you have those 4 quarter points pinned, you can begin pinning along the rest of the skirt hem. Just be very careful and aware that there shouldn't be any stretching. Everything should be laying perfectly flat between the skirt and the facing. So if you get to a point and feel like you're trying to stretch, just remove the pins and readjust everything until it lays perfectly flat. Now that everything is pinned, we'll stitch it in place using a straight stitch set at a top stitch length. For me, I like 3.0 on my machine. Start by stitching the very bottom edge, 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And here's how it looks so far. We still have the raw edge at the bottom and the 2 raw edges are right together. So next we need to stitch the top of that facing. Go ahead and turn your skirt so you're stitching from the inside and stitch just about 1/8 of an inch away from the top edge of that facing. Here's how it'll look from the inside and from the outside. Give it a nice press and everything should be laying smooth and flat. And you are done. Wasn't that so easy? You have your very own sundown skirt. Be sure to share your make across social media using hashtag #GSSundownSkirt. We love seeing all your wonderful Greenstyle makes and hearing from you. So leave me a love note in the comments and let me know how you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope to hear from you soon. Happy sewing from all of us at Greenstyle.